This session is to really spend some time talking about an investor's perspective on immigration and entrepreneurship. And I think as we heard just previously in the last session, you do have this kind of chicken and egg situation where for even the GEIR program, there's a close association to the ability to be able to raise funds before you can even get that visa. But even if you are successful in getting a visa, you're still going to face the challenge that most startups face, which is how do you get the startup funded? So why don't we all take a seat and we'll get started. So let me start. I'll just introduce myself. My name's David McFarlane. I'm president of a software company literally just like half a block away from here called Litmus Software, actually founded by 3 Brits, and I'll sort of explain that story in a moment. And I'm also a venture partner in a venture firm called Converge Venture Partners, formerly known as Common Angels. If you'd heard of them from that title, it's a consortium of institutionalized angel investors here in Boston. And as we were going through the first part of this, it was very interesting for me because I started to realize just how many hurdles I had personally gone through in order to actually make it here this far. You can probably tell that I have the remnants, at least, of a British accent. But I've lived in the States for the last 25 years. And I came here originally on what's called an L1 visa, which is very simple. You transfer within your company, nice and easy. But my partner wasn't so lucky. He wasn't able to come here on any one of those visas. So we actually had to participate in what was called a E2 investment visa. So we actually had to create a small business, which we did down in Cape Cod, and basically show that that was an ongoing investment. And we actually did that for 15 years. In order for him to be there. And that was all great, and I was there for 10 years, and in this company for 10 years, took the company public, all fun, etc. And then I decided to change companies, and I started with another small startup. And I didn't do my research very well. I thought I could just transfer from my L1 visa to an H1B, and suddenly found myself in a situation where they were going to kick me out of the country in 60 days because I just wasn't able to do that. So I actually ended up getting one of these NIW green card visas. And I will tell you, one good thing for sure for the first panel is like, get yourself a good lawyer. If you can afford a good lawyer, it makes all the difference in the world. So they did this application for me for NIW. I was embarrassed when they did it at first, like national interest waiver. I'm not a scientist. I had no special skills that I could tell. But they actually submitted it, and it came back with an out-and-out rejection, almost laughable. And my lawyer said, no, don't worry about it. Just change it up a little bit. We'll submit it again. He did, and we got it. That was it. So I got a green card on an NIW visa. I went on, became a US citizen, so that made life a lot easier. But then, about 8 years ago, I joined an Israeli friend of mine to start a company. And the main reason was that he was finding it almost impossible to get funded as just an independent Israeli citizen. A lot of what he was doing involved a lot of IP, and we had a lot of complexity around how we actually managed the intellectual property rights when we funded the company, which we did with Northbridge here in Boston and Foundation Capital on the West Coast. And then most recently, this company I just mentioned is actually founded by 3 Brits who started the company. It's an email testing service. We make sure your email looks good everywhere, that it works when it gets there, and we can tell you how engaged all the customers are. It's gone on to be an incredibly successful business, but they moved over to the States. I joined them, grew the company, and we did, for the first time, a big round of investment. We raised $49 million about 18 months ago. But to do it, we had to jump through all of these hoops. It was a British company. We had to completely reincorporate the company into the US. We had to show that we were a US company in order to be able to get that investment. So just as I was listening to the stories, you start to understand just how many different ways this situation touches you as an investor. But what I'd love to do now is to maybe just hop along the panel and just ask everybody if they just introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your background and how you have engaged with international entrepreneurs and investors. We'd love to know from your point of view, like how much of your portfolio or portfolio companies are actually have international investors.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Johannes Fruehauf. I'm German, and I've been in Boston now for the last 15 years. My original visa was a J1 visa. I came as a postdoc after I had done my clinical training. I'm a physician by training. clinical training in Germany, and I came with the intent to do a year or maybe two of scientific study at Harvard. And I'm sure that applies to maybe half of the room here. And then, of course, things don't always go as expected, and things go... In fact, it took me much longer to get my paper out. And so, in the end, I had the opportunity to start a company in Boston, and I was glad to explore that entrepreneurial path, which ultimately through... So I started with a J1 visa, and that, as many of you know, has a return home requirement. So I needed to get that waived before I could get an H1B, and ultimately, after we had the company venture finance, we raised like $20 million over the different series of financings. We were able to get a green card for that. I'm currently doing several things. One, I'm on this panel because I'm now a general partner at a fund we started a few months ago called BioInnovation Capital. And if you have a cool idea in the life sciences, come pitch us. We are also running a series of co-working spaces for people in the life sciences. The most famous one is called Lab Central. It's about 2 blocks from here down on Main Street, where we are home to about 30 startups in life sciences. And we have a series of similar labs around the country called biolabs. So we have another biolabs in Kendall Square. We have now one in San Diego, one in San Francisco, one in North Carolina, and we're building in New York City, we're building in Princeton, we're building in Philadelphia, and a few in Europe. So I'm fairly passionate about the entrepreneurship and immigration topic because it affects me and it affects my companies. We have recently done a tally. This was really sort of in February, in shock and in response to the awful things that happened like 2 weeks after the inauguration, where we asked everybody, so where do your founders come from? And so also, so at Lab Central, just to remind everybody, this has fairly enormous impact. We've started Lab Central 3 years ago. The company, the 60 or so companies that have come through there in aggregate have since raised about $1 billion. So $1.1 billion raised by these 60 companies in the last 3 years. So that's not sort of your average startup. These are fairly impactful startups, created 700 odd jobs and so forth. So we went back and asked everybody, in terms of immigration, does this affect, this was about the Muslim ban, right? The travel ban. And does this affect you? And yes, in fact, we had 2 entrepreneurs who were not traveling outside of the country because they were afraid that they might not come back into the country. And then we went further and we found out that 73% of the companies that we have at Lab Central are founded or are co-founded by someone who's like us, a first-time comer, right? And so that's a fairly stunning observation, but I've since learned that this is actually a fairly common theme. I was surprised, you may be surprised to hear that out of all the patents that get filed at MIT, 72% of them, so similarly, nearly like 3/4, are filed with an immigrant as the inventor or one of the co-inventors. So I think we have a real case to make for at least being pragmatic about this topic. And I shut up.
Thanks, Johannes. My name is Nitin Pachisia. I'm one of the founding partners of Unshackled Ventures. We are a pre-seed stage venture fund for founders who were not born in the US. So at least one of the founders has to be non-US born. We started 3 years ago coming out of our own experiences, which effectively stemmed from the fact that as an H-1B holder myself, when I started my first company, I spent half my time dealing with immigration. That obviously was the least productive of my time, and I wish that I didn't have to do that. In that previous venture previous companies of mine where I joined as an early employee, we raised money from very operational VCs like Andreessen Horowitz or First Round Capital, and they had created venture resources that helped companies save time, but there was no venture fund that solved this part of the problem and helped founders save time. So that became the inspiration for Unshackled Ventures, where with our investment, we also take over all of immigration work for our portfolio companies, which often includes employing the founders at Unshackled until that company progresses to a point where it's deemed like a real business by USCIS. In other cases, we structure the company in a way that they can take on E2 visas on their own. We always do green cards for our portfolio founders, their family members, whatever it takes. The point is founders should not spend a minute thinking about immigration because we can. To execute on that, we brought in an immigration law firm, to your point, always have a great lawyer. And so we brought in an immigration law firm as a GP partner, and they don't get paid legal fees. Their success is linked to the founder's success. When founders are successful, we'll all get paid. And so we've created this model where the capital alone doesn't win, and the capital alone is not the resource that the portfolio companies are looking for. It's capital plus immigration plus a network of operators. So many of our investors are operators in Boston, for example, Jeff Buchatskiy or Chip Hazard or Nicole Stata, Joe Caruso, and so on and so forth, Nurzas, who was here. And so the ideology is that by enabling entrepreneurs who've historically been among the most successful class in the country, by enabling them to dedicate 100% of their time to building their company and surrounding them with great people, we can actually help them succeed faster. All of this started out of our experiences. So I came to US in 2005 on an H-1B, which I still am on. When I started my first company, attorneys told me, you can't do this. Your company's not going to be able to hire you. And I said, isn't that your job to figure this out? But apparently it's not their job. Their job is to file documents. I figured it out, but that's what ultimately then led to we need a better resource. So to the question of portfolio, 100% of our portfolio is immigrant founded. At least one of the founders was not born here. Our founders come from 15 different countries. They're on 8 different visa types. It's a really 30% of the companies are led by women. So very diverse group, which we believe is the reason they're moving so fast. It's diversity that's fueling innovation.
That is fantastic to hear all this perspective on immigration. So, hi everyone, my name is Clement Cazalot. I'm the managing director of Techstars Boston. I'm also an immigrant. I came as an entrepreneur to this country. And regarding Techstars, so Techstars Boston is 135 companies, and out of which about a third of them are founders that are coming to Boston directly to work with us. So coming from France, that was my case. We had a company in France. I incorporated in the US to come to Techstars and transfer myself through an L1 initially, and then converted to a green card later on. And we get companies from Kosovo, from Israel, from Italy, from all over the world. And part of the other 75% that are directly from Boston originally, actually, 2/3 of them are with one of the co-founders that was born outside of the US and then stayed over. So out of 135 companies, that's about 85 companies-ish that are really related to this immigration topic. So that speaks a lot about, since we are focused, so Techstars is an accelerator as well as a venture fund, and we're focused really on the founders at their very early stage, like really the diamond in the rough that we're going to help grow further. So when people come initially, that's usually on a B1, B2 to the US. They come, they incorporate, they start creating a network in Boston or in some of the other cities where we operate. And then, if that makes sense, they're going to stay here and go further. And so that's something recurrently, as all of us we've seen, and as the previous panels were highlighting, that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. where, one more time, like probably if you can leave this room with only one thing is, don't be cheap on your visa. Really don't be cheap on your visa, because even when you think it's finished, it's not finished. In my case, so I created a company, went through Techstars with it, sold the company. However, we only sold our US operation, not our French operation. And the underlying concept of an L1 visa is that you're transferring from a foreign entity to the US. So suddenly, I ended up in a loophole while we were selling the company. Champagne, everything fantastic, but I was an illegal immigrant in the US. That was awkward. So I signed the paper, and the moment I signed the paper, I hadn't thought about my. So we signed the paper on a Saturday, Friday night at 2 a.m. So on a Saturday, and on Monday I get a call from the general counsel of the company. Hey, by the way, we just looked at your visa status, and actually you don't have any more a visa. Great, we just sold the company, that's awesome. Then we got conflictual opinions from different lawyers. Some were like, you need to get the hell out of the country as soon as possible. Others were like, stay here, we're gonna figure this out, we just need to declare to the government. Fast forward, get the best lawyer you can find, because they are really gonna be able to help. Like everything you read on the internet is great to start learning about it, but find partners that know about it. That's really what matters. And so to finish a little bit on Techstars, it's so both an accelerator and a fund where we literally come and provide all the support to start a company, to really act as your first senior employee that is going to help you figuring out everything from the operation to sales to immigration, while then you're going to be able to work with fantastic institutional investors to continue further.
Hi, my name is Eveline, and the real reason why I'm here today is because it would be extremely boring to only have guys on the panel. So I'm here to keep you until 8 o'clock at least. But other than that, I am an immigrant. I was born and raised in Brazil, and then I came here for my engineering studies at Berkeley. And I was rejected at the border at some point in transitioning from an F1 to an H1B visa, and that was Niagara Falls in January, and I only had bikinis on my suitcase because I was coming back from Brazil. But that must have been the only time in history when the immigration services were on a strike. So I had to wait until they were back to work to actually get my H-1B visa, sorted out. But I did, and it was fine. I lived the immigration experience 3 times because I immigrated also to Luxembourg in Europe and then to Ukraine in Europe. I lived in Ukraine for many years until the war started. And when I moved to Ukraine, I got into the startup world because as an immigrant, I could not, go into an executive role right away. I didn't have a network. There was no support system. So I thought, might as well do a startup, which I did in clean tech, and we did very well. And after that, I launched an accelerator and, fund for Ukrainian entrepreneurs. And it was awesome until the war started and I came back to the US, which was 2 years ago. And I'm currently director at Techstars with Clem. But I'm moving on to a venture fund that's going to be dedicated to immigrants, just like Unshackled. We are launching next month. It's called One Way Ventures. And for the immigrants in the crowd, I think one way, you know what I mean. You don't buy a round-trip ticket when you are an immigrant. So we're launching that because I found myself anyways continuously working with immigrant founders just because I can, relate to them and I find them to be amazing in terms of ability to get so much done with so little. When I came from Ukraine, I was constantly receiving calls from entrepreneurs. Hey, I just got here. How do I incorporate? How do I do this? How do I get a visa? How do I meet my customers? How do I do customer acquisition and so on and so forth? I ended up creating this organization called UA50, Ukraine 50, with 50 people, a network of people that would just answer that call for them. It was just a non-profit organization. And then I thought, gosh, I can do this for a business. Why don't I just focus on investment in those kind of people? Because I can totally add value in those cases much more than just a regular deal. And that's why, I'm going from Techstars to One Way Ventures. I'm very excited. And as far as answering the question about how many immigrant entrepreneurs we have on the fund, well, at Techstars, for the 3 classes, 3 batches that I, managed, we had 47% of the founders were immigrants. And if I add the first generation, then it's 66%. And that is not because we were on a mission to have that percentage. It just happens that way because they're hustlers.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So we're talking about 72%, 100%, 67, 66%. So a tremendous bias in your portfolios, and in some respects, purposefully so. That's part of your thesis. But I'm going to ask if you could also share or project what you think some of the other investment community attitude might be towards immigrant investors. And both your own philosophy, but also what you think their philosophy might be when they're thinking about and evaluating a company that has a international entrepreneur as part of the company. What do you think are some of the things that they might have to deal with? Anybody who wants to jump in.
I mean, for our case, we certainly don't have a conscious bias, and I find these super interesting concepts. I have to look into maybe adding a flavor like that to what we do. But I think we are really clearly this is a seed and Series A investment fund. So we have to invest into technologies. We have to invest into innovation. We have to invest into breakthrough solutions for large, significant problems. And so you're unbiased, right? Whoever brings the best idea should win. That said, I think there's very good consensus that in today's world, the most impactful innovation does not really come from me doing what I've learned for the last 25 years and looking even deeper into my microscope, right? And finding maybe one hair more at this cell that I've been staring at for the last 5 years. That's incremental. But the really big solutions that we observe and that we're excited about typically come when we have diverse solutions applied to maybe sometimes even old problems. And we clearly do see better solutions when we bring diverse teams together. These may be diverse out of country of origin, but they may also be diverse in terms of gender mix, of course, but also faculty. Like, we really like to mix in our facilities founders that come from very, very disparate technical backgrounds, and we benefit from having from facilitating those discussions. That's a big part of what we do, is create community. And even if you're looking at physicians that are trained in different countries, they will have been trained with slightly different preferences and views of how to solve problems. Or if you look at mathematicians, physicists, biologists. So we all strongly believe that the diversity of the team will help them come up with better answers to the questions that they will all face.
I can give you the perspective for an entrepreneur, since I was there. I was there 3 years ago. So the two main things that I faced and that I'm seeing now by speaking with other institutional investors is, first, there is additional complexity. And the one thing that we hate as investors is more complexity. There is already enough reason why a company will fail. Why suddenly adding the complexity of having a foreigner? And the second one, which might be surprising, or for other people, is like cultural misunderstanding. And I'll give you a very factual element. So when I came to the US, first time in 2010, so 7 years ago, the company initially that I had founded was called My Secret Garden. I was like, that's a cute name. Actually, My Secret Garden in in British English can go by pretty much, but in American English means my genital organs, mostly feminine. And so I arrive in front of the VCs and I'm like, okay, let me pitch you My Secret Garden. And they're like, are you a joke? Is that for real? Like, that basically, I'm going to speak briefly about my genitals. And that's like total cultural misunderstandings. That was a company about cryptography, about privacy. And so these are the two parts that you can see. On the one hand, this additional complexity, and that's on the extreme side, this example. But this cultural misunderstanding about how you're going to phrase, position your idea, put in perspective the problems that you're solving with your company. And that adds up and compound into a situation where sometimes it's best to leave that later in the discussion instead of bringing that up front.
I would say that, to be very pragmatic and straight to the point, you walk into that room, yes, there's going to be a ton of unconscious bias. So might as well just address the elephant in the room. Two things that you need to address. We walk in, the investor is thinking arbitrage. How can I buy cheap, sell, for much more, sell expensive, right? And why is he or she going to buy cheap? Because valuations, let's face it, for immigrant founders are lower. And because, guess what? You can do much more with much less, right? So you have to leverage that. You happen to come and, you have 10 developers working for like 4 times less the money in your original country. That's an asset. That's an advantage that you can leverage. And that's the kind of stuff that, investors' eyes go, woo, I like that. And by the way, I can scale. I can bring not only 10 developers, I can bring 100. And I will be, the cost savings are enormous when you are at that scale. So that's the arbitrage that you have to address right away. The other thing is you have to address the fact that they want you to be committed to this ecosystem, right? They don't want to give you money and you run away to your, back to your country and God knows what. So somehow you have to pass the impression that you are committed to the ecosystem where you're getting money from. So yes, you have all these, amazing, top-notch, cheap developers elsewhere, but you, as a CEO or, the CTO or the core team are here for good. And as a matter of fact, here's the plan for my visa, and here's the plan for growing the company, and here are the players that I plan to get in the US.
Well, actually, on that point then, if you were an entrepreneur coming in to pitch an investment company, you didn't yet have your visa status sorted. Do you tell them or not?
Absolutely, you have to be transparent always, right? But we've never had a visa issue. First of all, hopefully you're going to be talking to the right people. If you're talking to people who are scared of like a visa issue, they're probably not the best investors for you. Go to Unshackled, go to One Ventures in the future, talk to the right people, okay? They are just not around enough. But address the issue, and we as Techstars, with so many cases of so many companies coming here, we've never had a founder rejected for a visa application. We have good lawyers we work with, and as a matter of fact, we have one Techstars founder here who went through the process successfully, and we've never in our history had an issue with visa.
Anybody else have a view on that?
I think it's pretty binary. You either, generally speaking, so we have relationships with more than 200 seed stage funds, and we've personally talked to the GPs, and it's binary. You either believe in the power of diversity or you don't. And if you don't, they're not the right investors for an immigrant-founded company. At the same time, I will be pretty clear that most immigrants don't start companies just by themselves. More often combinations are immigrants and citizens, so it's not just an immigrant company or American company, it's usually a combination. The concern part is a valid part because a US-based VC, when they're investing in a US-based business, they want to be sure that for the long term, you're going to be able to stay here and dedicate your time to your company, not to dealing with immigration or be concerned about my family somewhere and I may have to go back or whatever else that is. So the assurance that they're seeking is that you're working with the right partners. That right partner could be an investor involved, could be your attorneys, but they need some assurance that you're going to be able to build your business here, because it takes 7 to 10 years to build a business that a VC is investing in. So it again comes down to who are the people you're surrounded with, which is not just an immigrant question again, right? It's whatever business you're building, you want to surround yourselves with people who will take away whatever distractions or time sinks you're dealing with. So there's a lot of things in business that the founders have to solve themselves, but there's also a lot of other things that partners can solve for you. So, you look at Techstars and YC and 500, they take care of certain things for you. You look at VCs that have operational teams for recruiting or for biz dev or for sales. They're taking some of that work off of your chest. And so if you're working with partners who are similarly taking away that one question off the table, you're fine. It's actually a positive bias for investing in immigrants. Historically, they've generated better venture returns, so why not?
I spoke to a couple of VC firms about this question and asked them sort of what's top of their mind and, where do they find challenges with immigrants? And they had sort of 3 things that came out. One, you mentioned, which is culture, the cultural communication fit. Closely associated with that sometimes was English as a second language and whether or not that becomes a challenge. But the other part was one I hadn't really thought about, although I experienced it myself, was do they know the ecosystem that they're selling in here? And are they networked into that ecosystem? I personally ran enterprise sales. I came to the US and I suddenly realized I just didn't know who these companies were. I just instinctively, when I saw a name, I didn't know, what kind of company it was. How would you address those concerns on the behalf, let's say, of an immigrant immigrant entrepreneur?
So I'll start on the ecosystem piece. As an immigrant in the US, that's our duty to be committed to the country. Since we are coming here, we're going through the hurdle of understanding how can we stay. Our first duty is to be more Americans than Americans. To be completely blunt, by experience, it's our duty to be here to be immersed in this ecosystem, to understand beyond our culture what are the key companies, what are the key players in our field of research, in our field of expertise. So they are platforms. So the institutional investors are fantastic for that, to help getting you plugged to the right people, to the right mentors. But then any sort of community that you're already in, try to get outside of the direct immigrant community and go beyond. So all the programs that are helping you to have mentors that are coming, and where you're gonna have some sort of mentor madness, where you're gonna meet a lot of people and network all the time. All the meetups that are dedicated to your field of expertise. These are the tools that are, especially when you're at seed stage or a Series A stage, and when you're coming to San Francisco, to Boston, to New York. That's like, these are easy plugs for us as immigrants in a matter of a few months to understand who are these speakers who are here. If I understand the speakers, if I'm able to create a connection with them, these are key people in the ecosystem that are gonna be able to connect me to other people and alleviate this concern.
I think for these cases, organizations such as Techstars, Mass Challenge, YC, etc., they are really amazing, because in 3 months you get to know pretty much almost everybody that matters in that ecosystem, and those people will lead to others and others. It's really like localization on asteroids. Like, you really get plugged very quickly. The biggest exit for Techstars Boston came from Estonia. Very, very young guy. came here, didn't know anybody, went to live in an ugly apartment in Framingham, with like his newborn child and wife, and asking himself, why did I do this? I mean, really, I was fine in Estonia. But through Techstars, in less than 6 months, he was like really plugged. So I totally advocate for that.
So one last, is there another answer? Oh, okay, one last general question, then we'll open up to the floor. As we've been having the various discussions, we've heard all different kinds of visas mentioned at different points. So people L1s and H1s and GR and E2s, etc. The good news is that you're not lawyers, right? I think we're good. So you can say things that the other guys couldn't say. In your experience with your portfolio companies and various entrepreneurs that you've started, any sense of which ones of these tend to be a little bit easier? Do you have a particular go-to visa that you would typically try to engage first?
No. Meaning immigration, I say immigration is like medicine. It's very personal to the individual. So at a macro level, we can talk about all kind of stuff, but the truth comes down to the one individual you're dealing with, what their country of birth, citizenship, education, experience, et cetera, are. And so it boils down to engaging with the right resource, the right attorney to figure out what is right for you, which is like how you go to a doctor to figure out what's the right medicine for you. And therefore, so our experience has been there's no best strategy, and there's not just one strategy. So for example, when we decide to invest in a company, our attorneys always have a plan A, B, and C. Here's what we're going to do first. If it doesn't work, B, C. The cap-exempt H-1B, for example, with the GEAR program or in partnership with universities is kind of our plan D fallback at all times. And so I would say it's not good to get caught up in what's kind of globally best or not. It's understand your circumstances and work with the right partners to create your plans A, B, and C.
Although I agree with everything, like immigration is really a case-by-case topic. Actually, it's not although. I agree with everything you said. In terms of practical, and I'm not a lawyer, it just for the sake of the example and what I'm seeing more and more. So for foreigners who already had operation, the L visa seems to be a recurrent capability for both for coming themselves to the US and also bringing talents. Even so, I've been able to sponsor, and I've seen companies sponsoring even people they had as contractors coming through L1B visa. It's like there is some twist to that, but even through people that you're going to be employing for more than a year outside of your country, outside of the US, I've seen that being used more and more, the L visa, as well as the O visa with the right lawyers. That seems to be something that is first exempt of any cap, so has an amount of risk that is lower, also legal fees that are higher. And also lead to green card much faster with some accelerated process.
Yeah, I think in summary, as investors, we always look, certainly we do, I'm sure many of you do the same, we look for the team, and there's much more emphasis on the team than all of the other aspects. That's certainly true at these early stages. And so you want to not have So you don't want these founders to be inhibited. You don't want them to spin their gears unproductively. And so I think ultimately any path that leads to a faster green card should be the desirable path. And again, I think we all are called upon to make this message heard and clearly, very vocally speak out that if you're a founder, if you're creating a company, and let's say, okay, fine, put a threshold on it, right? If you're able to raise $2 million, then there ought to be a pathway that gives you a green card to give you peace of mind and make you work productively. And so I think we should all sort of carry that home and speak to whatever politicians that you may know, because that is an important and a relatively, common sense thing to do. It's even doable for the people who voted for the current government, because it's going to make more jobs. I mean, if you're not in favor of that, you're just plain stupid.
Any general questions from the floor about investment? It's getting late, I can tell.
The first question is always the hardest. Let's skip to the second questions.
My question is for the Techstar investors. Since you guys invested in very young companies, what are the most fundamental or the most common thing that you look into the founders or the companies, even though some of them don't even have a real product or traction yet? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a very good question, but I think that applies to all four of us since we're looking at early stage. On the case of Techstars, it's really about the founders. It's really about the people, because the earlier you are in your process, the more likelihood there is that over these 7-10 years that it will take you to build these amazing companies, that you're going to change your idea, the solutions that you're solving many times. So it's really the founder and how passionate they are by the problem they are solving.
We just invested in a company before the first line of code was written. And truly, we have never told the company that you're too early for us, which is a very common line a lot of VCs say. The reason is we like to invest very early because we know with the resources that we have, with the community that we have, will actually help the founders get to that point much faster. So what we look for in that situation is what we've called a combination of founders' unfair advantage and a very strong adversity muscle. So adversity muscle you can prove by passion, by your perseverance, by what you have done to understand where you are, where you need to go. And the unfair advantage is a product of your past, but more importantly, how that past applies to your future. Because I'm not investing in your past, I'm investing in your future. And so we actually published a blog post to make it clear for founders who are applying or pitching us as to what's important to us. And it's usually a combination of a team with a unique advantage in solving a big problem. And if they succeed, which few will, but if they succeed, they will become the new market standard, right? And if I can confidently write that statement after meeting a team, we'll invest in one meeting and before the first line of code.
No, I think we all invest. If you invest early, you have to invest in the people, right? Much more than their technologies. I'm in awe that you invest in people without any technology, but that may be easier in your tech field than in ours. But certainly, I think the tendency is clearly there. You look for qualifications, you look for personality, you look for integrity more than anything else.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay, then I think just for this panel, I'd like to thank all the panelists very much. It's been really, really engaging and entertaining. I think I had one major takeaway from this, which is get yourself a good immigration lawyer. And if for some reason your startup doesn't work, become an immigration lawyer.
You can all remain up here for 2 seconds. I would like to thank everyone for coming tonight. And I guess if there's one takeaway for me, it is that places like Boston, and I think with all due respect, the Valley, they work really hard to help founders figure stuff out. They work really, really hard. There's no question that Boston and particularly San Francisco now are really working hard to help founders who come to this country from other parts of the world, if they're maybe transferring, if they're going to school. I mean, I think we get it, even though every day that we're learning kind of more. So I think we should celebrate our success, but also we need to redouble our efforts because there's some very difficult headwinds that we're going to face. If we think immigration is difficult now, which it is, we're going to get so many more questions from these folks. However, you know what? We're smarter than they are. We have a long-term view, and I think we're going to succeed. And it's mostly because of people like this, and people in the audience, and people that have participated in every other panel. So thank you very much. We can stay for another hour and enjoy. And please meet these people. They're really here to help you. They're truly giving. Thank you.